Sunlight carved their shame in gold. Sheriff Caleb Holt reigned in his dust-caked mare at the edge of the abandoned stagecoach relay station, the sight before him freezing the blood in his veins. There, lashed to the splintered hitching post where weary teens once rested, stood his wife Marion and their daughters, 8-year-old Lily clutching her mother's torn calico skirt, 6-year-old Rose trembling like a snared rabbit. Not ropes bound them, but crude, burlap sacks hung around their necks. Scrawled in thick, black grease pencil, on each sack was a number, a price. Marion met his eyes across the desolate yard, her gaze a well of terror and defiance. The wind snatched at the obscene tags, making them flutter like obscene moths against their throats. Dust devils swirled, tasting of salt and despair. Caleb's hand clenched on his coat, knuckles white as bone. What would a man do to save his own? The silence screamed. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches your heart, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've got something extra special saved just for you. The image burned behind Caleb Holt's eyelids, searing past the grid of the long ride. The relay station, a skeletal ruin against a vast, indifferent canvas of the Wyoming plains, had vomited forth his nightmare. The price tags, the terror in Lily's wide, blue eyes mirroring Marion's own, the way Rose had tried to shrink into nothingness. It wasn't ropes or chains that imprisoned them in that moment, but the sheer, brutal dehumanization of it. Numbers, commodities, his heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird, a frantic counterpoint to the slow, heavy thud of his horse's hooves eating the miles back towards Bitterroot Junction. He'd found a note nailed to the door of his own office, a single sheet of cheap paper weighted down by a river-smooth stone, a stone Lily had given him weeks ago, speckled gray and white her lucky charm. The message was stark, devoid of flourish or threat, just cold coordinates and a time. Sunset, the Old Crow Station. Come alone, tell no one. The stone, that small token of childish faith, had felt like an accusation in his palm, colder than the iron of his badge. He'd saddled Shadow, his sturdy black gelding, within minutes, leaving only a scrawled "back soon" on the deputy's desk blotter. No time for explanations, no time for posse calls. The ticking clock in his head was a frantic pulse of his family's fear. The land stretched out, immense and uncaring. Sagebrush plains rolled towards distant, saw-toothed ridges that bit into a sky already leaching the day's blue into bruised purples and oranges. Sunset was bleeding on the horizon, long fingers of crimson light stretching across the dry earth, turning the dust kicked up by Shadow's passage into swirling clouds of ochre smoke. The air carried the dry, resinous scent of sage, the faint tang of alkali from a dry creek bed they crossed, and beneath it all, the metallic taste of his own dread. Caleb pushed Shadow hard, the horse's breath coming in rhythmic gusts, sweat darkening its neck despite the cooling air. Every creak of saddle leather, every jingle of the bit, echoed the frantic rhythm of his thoughts. Who? Why? Bitterroot wasn't a boom town flush with gold or cattle fortunes. It was a hard-scrabbled junction clinging to existence, a place of weathered faces and quiet struggles. What enemy had he made profound enough to strike at his heart like this? Memories, sharp as spur rowels, pricked him as he rode. Not of Marion and the girls laughing in their small garden behind the clapboard sheriff's office, though those images were a fresh agony. Instead, the plains wind, signed to the tall, dry grasses, carried the ghost of another wind, colder, sharper, biting through a threadbare coat years ago. He saw his younger brother, Ben, 16 years old and full of reckless bravado, facing down two drifters over a stolen chicken behind a livery in some nameless, wind-scoured settlement further south. Caleb, barely 19 himself and wearing a deputy star for the first time, had been just seconds too slow rounding the corner. The crack of the pistol shot hadn't been loud, more like a dry branch snapping. He'd found Ben slumped against the rough wood, eyes wide with surprise, not pain. The life already fled. The drifters were long gone, swallowed by the vastness. Caleb had carried that failure, that weight of arriving a breath too late. like a stone in his soul ever since. It was why he wore the badge in Bitterroot, a penance, a shield, a desperate attempt to impose order on chaos. Now, history threatened a monstrous repetition. The fear wasn't just for Mary and the girls. It was a paralyzing terror being too late again. He skirted the main trail into Bitterroot as the last embers of sunset guttered out, plunging the world into the deep indigo of twilight. Stars pricked through the vast dome overhead, cold and distant, burning like silent accusations. He approached the town from back, through the scrubby pines and rocky outcrops that rose behind the livery stable. The familiar sounds drifted on the still air, the clang of the blacksmith's hammer finally stilled, the tinny piano starting up in the sagebrush saloon, the distant bark of a dog. Normalcy, a mockery. He dismounted in the deep shadow behind the jailhouse. Looping shadows ranged loosely around a stunted juniper. The gelding lowered its head, blowing softly, grateful for the rest. Caleb moved like smoke, keeping to the alleys, the scent of wood smoke from chimneys, and the underlying odor of horse manure and dust thick in his nostrils. His destination was the Thirsty Miner, a narrow, dimly lit saloon tucked between the barber and the dry goods store, known more for its potent whiskey and the taciturn nature of its owner, Silas Cobb, than for raucous revelry. He pushed through the bat-wing doors, the hinges groaning a low protest. The air inside was thick with tobacco smoke and the sour tang of spilled beer. A handful of regulars hunched over scarred tables or leaned against a long bar made of rough-hewn timber, dark with age and polish. Silas, a bear of a man with a thick gray beard and eyes like chips of flint, was wiping a glass with a rag that looked none too clean. He glanced up as Caleb entered, his expression unchanging, but a flicker deep in those flinty eyes acknowledged the sheriff's presence. Caleb didn't approach the bar directly. He took a seat in a shadowed corner booth, his back to the wall, his gaze sweeping the room. No unfamiliar faces jumped out, no overt hostility, just the weary resignation of men ending a long day. After a few minutes, Silas ambled over, setting a chipped mug of black coffee in front of Caleb without being asked. He slid into the opposite bench, the wood creaking under his bulk. He didn't speak immediately, just studied Caleb's face in the gloom. The single oil lamp hanging above their table cast deep hollows under Caleb's eyes, etched the grim lines around his mouth. "Ain't seen hide nor hair of Marion or the young un since yesterday noon," Silas rumbled, his voice low and gravelly, barely audible over the tinny piano. "Saw her heading toward the mercantile. Looked troubled, more than usual." He took a slow sip from a glass of amber liquid he'd brought with him. His knuckles were scarred, testament to a life lived hard. Caleb wrapped his hands around the hot mug, the warmth failing to penetrate the cold dread in his core. "Troubled how?" His own voice sounded foreign, rough. Silas shifted, his gaze drifting toward the saloon's grimy window, as if checking the street. "Got a rider in late yesterday. Stranger, hard-looking. Didn't stop for whiskey, just water for his horse. Asked questions." Silas paused, his flinty eyes meeting Caleb's again. "Asked about you, Sheriff. About your duties, your vulnerabilities." The word hung heavy in the smoky air. "Didn't like the answers he got from me, I reckon. Moved on quick. But he talked to others. Folks who got loose tongues when silver flashes." He nodded almost imperceptibly toward the thin, weasel-faced man nursing a beer at the far end of the bar. Jedediah Pike, known for his fondness for cards and his inability to keep secrets when whiskey loosened his tongue. A cold fury began to thaw the ice in Caleb's veins, mixing with the dread. Vulnerabilities. His family. They were targets because they were his. This wasn't random banditry. It was calculated, cruel. Where this rider head? Silas shrugged massive shoulders. "West, towards the high country. Rattlesnake Ridge way." His voice dropped even lower, barely a whisper. "Heard whispers, Caleb. Not just this one rider. Talk of transactions. Things moving through the passes. Not cattle. Not, or things that fetch a high price for men who don't ask questions, men with money and no morals. He drained his glass. Bad business, Sheriff. The kind that leaves marks. He didn't elaborate on the nature of the things. He didn't need to. The implication curdled in Caleb's stomach. Silas pushed himself up, the bench groaning in relief. Coffee's on the house tonight, Sheriff. He walked back to the bar, leaving Caleb alone with the dregs of his cold coffee and the chilling implications. Rattlesnake Ridge, a jagged, inhospitable spine of rock riddled with old mining tunnels and outlaw hideouts. Transactions, high price, no morals. The price tags on his family's necks weren't just symbols of shame. They were horrifyingly literal. They were merchandise in some dark, unseen market. The thought was a physical blow. He left the saloon as silently as he'd entered, the tinny piano fading behind him. The night was fully descended now, the stars brighter, colder. He needed his gear, his rifle, more ammunition, supplies. He needed to move, now. The relay station was a staging point, a display case. They wouldn't still be there. They'd be moved, taken deeper into the wilderness, towards that buyer, towards Rattlesnake Ridge. He slipped back toward the jailhouse, senses straining. The town seemed quieter now, the few remaining lights and windows like watchful, indifferent eyes. He reached the back where Shadow waited. He was just loosening the reins from the juniper when a sound froze him. Not the sigh of wind through pines, not the distant hoot of an owl. It was a distinct, metallic snick of a rifle hammer being cocked. The sound came from the darkness above him, from the rocky bluff overlooking the back of the jail. He didn't move, didn't breathe. Slowly, deliberately, he turned his head, his eyes scanning the inky blackness where the starlight didn't reach. High up on the ridge, silhouetted for a fraction of a second against the slightly lighter sky, was the unmistakable outline of man, the long barrel of a rifle angled down towards him. Then the figure melted back into the deeper shadow of the rocks. Gone. Watching. Waiting. The trap was already sprung. Caleb stood frozen, not by fear now, but by the razor-sharp edge of a terrible understanding. They knew he was coming, and they were ready. The silhouette vanished into the rock shadow like smoke into night air, but the echo of that hammercock lingered, a cold vibration in Caleb Holt's bones. Time stretched brittle and thin. One wrong move, one shift of his shoulder toward his holster Colt, and the night would shatter with gunfire. His family's faces, Marion's defiant terror, Lily's wide blue stare, Rose's silent shivering, flashed before him, brighter than the distant, indifferent stars. Too late again. The old fear, Ben's ghost, whispered it, but a colder fury, honed by the obscenity of those burlap price tags, rose to meet it. He would not be too late. Not this time. He didn't look up again. Slowly, deliberately, he patted Shadow's neck, the gesture casual, unconcerned. "Easy, boy," he murmured, the sound swallowed by the vast Wyoming dark. He leaned forward as if checking a cinch, his hand brushing the worn leather of his saddlebag. Inside, his fingers found the cool metal of the spare cartridge box. But it wasn't ammunition he sought. It was stillness, the patience of stone. He counted the frantic beats of his heart against the rhythmic sigh of wind to the pines behind the jailhouse. 10, 20. The tension in the air was a physical thing, thick as river mud. No shot came. The watcher was patient too, content to observe, to confirm his prey was cornered. Caleb straightened, turning as if to head towards the jailhouse door, putting his back momentarily to the bluff, a calculated risk, a feint. He felt the unseen gaze like a physical pressure between his shoulder blades. He took 2 steps, then abruptly pivoted, lunging sideways into the deeper gloom hugging the jailhouse wall. He moved fast, low, keeping the solid timber between himself and the ridge. He heard nothing from above, no curse, no scrambling. The watcher was disciplined, professional, not some drunken cowhand. This was planned. He slipped around the far corner of the building, melting into the narrow alley that ran towards the livery. The familiar smells of hay and manure offered no comfort. He needed his rifle, supplies. The jailhouse was a death trap now. They'd expect him there. He skirted the livery, keeping to the deepest shadows, his senses screaming. The town seemed unnaturally quiet, the usual night sounds, a barking dog, a snatch of laughter from the sagebrush, muted as if holding its breath. He reached the back of the small, clapboard building that served as his home and office. The window to his private quarters was dark. He pictured the empty rooms, the girl's rag doll abandoned on a chair, Marion's shawl draped over the back of the rocker. The ache was a physical wound. He couldn't risk the door. Kneeling in the dust beside the foundation, he pried loose a loose stone he'd placed years ago, a crude hiding spot known only to him and Marion. Inside the shallow cavity lay a leather-wrapped bundle. He pulled it free, his Winchester 73, clean and oiled, alongside a heavy canvas satchel containing spare cartridges, jerky, a small canteen, and a brass pocket compass Marion had given him on their first anniversary. "For when you lose your way," she'd said, her smile brighter than the polished metal. He clutched the compass now, its cool surface a fleeting connection to her warmth. He hadn't lost his way. The world had turned monstrous around him. He stuffed the bundle into his saddlebag, slung the rifle across his back, and moved. He skirted the town's edge, heading west into the open scrubland towards the looming darkness of Rattlesnake Ridge. The moon, a thin silver paring, offered scant light, turning the sagebrush into hulking, indistinct shapes. Every rustle in the brush, every snap of a twig, felt like the cocking of a hammer. He pushed shadow hard, the gelding's powerful strides eating the distance, the dry earth crunching under its hooves. The ridge grew, jagged and forbidding, a broken spine against the star-strewn sky. Silas Cobb's gravelly voice echoed in his mind. Transactions, things that fetch a high price. Bad business, human cargo, his Marion, his girls, sold like livestock. The rage threatened to choke him, a fire burning alongside the icy dread. A memory surfaced unbidden, as the rhythmic motion of the horse lulled his conscious guard. Not of Ben this time, but of Marion. Early spring a year ago, they'd ridden out towards Whispering Falls. Just the two of them, the girls left with Silas's wife for the afternoon. The air had been crisp, scented with pine and damp earth. They'd found a meadow bursting with wildflowers, blue lupin, Indian paintbrush, yellow balsam root. Marion had dismounted, her laugh clear as the creek water tumbling nearby, and twirled amidst the blooms, her skirt catching the sunlight. Caleb had watched her, struck dumb by the simple, fierce beauty of her joy, the way the light gilded her hair. He'd told her she looked like a piece of the sky come down to earth. She'd blushed that rare, deep flush that started at her neck and rose to her temples, and thrown a wildflower at him. Flatterer, she'd accused, but her eyes had shone. That memory, a stolen moment of pure light, now felt like a precious, fragile thing held over an abyss. Was that joy extinguished, replaced by terror in some dark hole? He reached the lower slopes of Rattlesnake Ridge as the false dawn began to bleed gray into the eastern sky. The terrain turned rougher, strewn with scree and jagged outcroppings. He dismounted, leading Shadow now, picking his way carefully. He scanned the ground, the rocks, looking for any sign. A scrap of cloth, a hoofprint fresher than the weathering wind could count for. The silence was profound, broken only by the wind whistling through rock clefts, a mournful sound. Then, caught on a thorny greasewood bush near a narrow animal trail, leading up into a gulch, he saw it. A small strip of faded blue calico. Lily's dress, torn roughly, his heart clenched. He freed the scrap, holding it tightly. It was damp. Tears? Or just the chill night air? He looked up the gulch, a dark maw splitting the ridge face. A likely route into the high, hidden places, a route they might have taken as family. He pressed on, the gulch walls rising steep and sheer on either side, choking the weak dawn light. The air grew colder, smelling of damp stone and ancient dust. He moved with agonizing slowness, every sense straining. The Winchester held ready. The gulch twisted, narrowed. Suddenly, shadows snorted, ears pricking forward. Caleb froze. Ahead, around a bend, came the low murmur of voices. Harsh, guttural, not casual conversation. Orders. He eased forward, pressing himself against the cold rock face, inching toward the bend. Peering around the rough stone, he saw a small clearing where the gulch widened slightly. 2 men stood beside a pack mule laden with bulging canvas sacks. Rough-looking, unshaven, wearing heavy coats despite the cool morning. One, a burly man with a scar tracing his jawline, was tightening a cinch. The other, leaner, with a perpetual squint, scanned the gulch walls above them. Caleb's blood ran cold. These weren't the buyers. They were the transporters. Muscle, and the sacks too small for or the wrong shape for supplies. His gaze swept the clearing. No sign of Marion or the girls. Had they already been moved further? Or were they nearby, hidden? The squint-eyed man suddenly stiffened, his hand dropping to the pistol at his hip. "Hear that?" he hissed. Scarjaw paused, listening. Wind in the rocks. "Nothing. Ain't wind." Sounded like rockfall. "Up there." He pointed vaguely up the eastern gulch wall. Scarjaw grunted, unconvinced but wary. "Check it. Quick. Don't like Ling Aaron." He turned back to the mule. Caleb's mind raced. Rockfall? Or a signal? A trap within a trap? He couldn't take them both silently. The gulch was too confined. He needed information. He needed to know where his family was now. Silas's warning about transactions echoed. Were these men waiting for a rendezvous? He eased back, melting into shadows near the bend, his mind formulating a desperate plan. Distract, separate, extract the truth from one. The badge on his chest felt heavy, cold. The law demanded procedure, witnesses. But the law felt like a distant, useless thing up here. His family demanded action. The moral chasm yawned before him. How far would he bend? How far would he break? He picked up a loose, fist-sized rock from the gulch floor. Taking careful aim, he hurled it high up the opposite gulch wall, away from where Squint Eye was heading. It clattered loudly against the rocks, bouncing down in a small cascade of pebbles. "There!" Scarjaw snapped, whirling, drawing his pistol. "Told you, east wall." He gestured urgently towards the sound. "Go!" Squint Eye hesitated, then cursed and scrambled up the steep, rocky slope opposite Caleb, pistol drawn, his attention fully diverted. Caleb waited only a heartbeat. As Scarjaw turned back towards a mule, muttering about jumpy partners, Caleb stepped silently into the clearing. The Winchester was leveled at the man's chest before Scarjaw even registered the movement behind him. "Don't," Caleb said, his voice low, rough as a surrounding stone. "Reach for that iron and you're done." Scarjaw froze, hand half raised. He turned slowly, his eyes widening in recognition, then narrowing with a mix of fear and defiance. "Sheriff, where are they?" Caleb demanded, closing the distance, the rifle barrel unwavering. "The woman, the girls." Scarjaw spat into the dust. "Don't know what you're talking about. The Crow Station, the sacks, the numbers. Where are they?" Caleb's voice cracked with a strain. He took another step, the muzzle inches from the man's heart. "Talk, or I swear I'll put you down right here and find someone who will." Fear flickered in the man's eyes, warring with some ingrained loyalty or fear of something worse. He glanced nervously towards the gulch wall, where his partner had vanished. They ain't here no more. Move in before first light." "Where?" The word was a snarl. "Higher up, old mine entrance, the Serpent's Gulch shaft, past the second waterfall." He swallowed hard. "Buyers comin' tonight. Feller name of Vance, from Cheyenne Way. Pays good for clean stock." The phrase, so casually brutal, made Caleb's finger tighten on the trigger. "How many men?" "Guards. 4, maybe 5, including the boss. Hard cases, Sheriff. You ain't getting in there quiet. There was almost a plea in his voice now, a desperate hope Caleb would just leave. The boss? Who's the boss? Caleb pressed. Scarred Jaw shook his head, genuine terror flashing now. Don't know his name. Nobody does. Just, he's there. Runs things. Calls the shots. You cross him, you disappear. He glanced nervously upwards again. Look, Sheriff, I told you what I know. Now let me... A sharp whistle pierced the air from high up on the gulch wall. A signal. Scarjaw's eyes darted toward the sound, then back to Caleb, panic flaring. He lunged sideways, clawing for his holstered pistol. Caleb didn't hesitate. He squeezed the trigger. The Winchester roared in the confined space, the sound monstrous, echoing off the rock walls like thunder. Scarjaw jerked backwards, a dark stain blooming on his chest, his eyes wide with shock before he crumpled into the dust. The report was still echoing when a bullet spanged off the rock near Caleb's head, showering him with stone chips. Squint Eye, higher up, had fired. Caleb ducked behind the startle mule, using the animal as cover. Another shot whined past. He levered a fresh round into the chamber, scanning the rocks above. Squint Eye was scrambling for better cover. Exposed for a moment, Caleb fired. The man cried out, clutching his arm, his pistol clattering down the slope. He vanished behind an outcrop. Caleb didn't wait. He knew more would come. The shot was a beacon. He grabbed the mule's lead rope, slapped its rump, and sent it bolting back down the gulch the way he'd come, hoping to cause confusion. He turned and ran deeper into the narrowing gulch, toward the higher ground, towards the waterfalls, towards the Serpent's Gulch shaft. Marion, Lily, Rose. Hold on. He pushed hard, lungs burning, legs aching, the gulch floor rising steeply. The sound of rushing water grew louder. He rounded a sharp bend and saw it. The first waterfall, a silvery ribbon cascading down mossy black rock into a deep cold pool. He skirted the pool, scrambling up the slick, treacherous rocks beside the falls. Above, the gulch leveled somewhat, choked with boulders and stunted pines. He could see the second waterfall ahead, taller, plunging into shadow. And above it, carved into the cliff face, the dark, yawning mouth of an old mine adit, the Serpent's Gulch shaft. Silas's map, hastily sketched on a scrap of paper, had mentioned it, a place of forgotten hopes and present horrors. He paused, catching his breath behind a massive boulder, scanning the approach. The mine entrance looked deserted, a black hole in the rock. But he saw the signs. Fresh boot prints in the damp earth near the entrance, a discarded cigarette stub. They were here, or had been. Was Vance already inside? Were his girls? He was about to move forward, to risk the open ground between the boulders and the mine entrance, when a flicker of movement caught his eye high on the ridge above the shaft. Not a man. A flash of color. Pale yellow, like Lily's hair ribbon. His breath hitched. Was it? Or just a trick of the light on lichen? He strained his eyes. The ribbon, if it was a ribbon, was tied to a stunted pine branch, just visible against the gray rock. A marker? A signal? Or a desperate sign left by a frightened child? Hope, fierce and terrifying, wore with caution. He had to get closer. He had to know. Taking a deep breath, he broke from the cover of the boulder, sprinting low and fast across the open stretch toward the base of the cliff below the mine entrance, his eyes fixed on that tiny splash of yellow above. He was halfway there when a voice, cold and mocking, rang out from the mine's dark mouth, amplified by the rocky amphitheater. Took you long enough, Sheriff. Caleb skidded to a halt, raising the Winchester, heart hammering against his ribs. He couldn't see the speaker, lost in the deep shadow of the attic. We were starting to think you got lost. The voice continued, smooth, dangerous. Or maybe you decided your family wasn't worth the trouble? A low chuckle echoed. But here you are, right on time for the main event. The voice hardened, dropped the rifle. Holt, Or the little one with the yellow ribbon loses more than just her hair tie. Caleb froze. The yellow ribbon was Lily's. It was no trick. They had them, and they were watching. His finger hovered over the trigger. The weight of the Winchester suddenly immense. The cold muzzle of unseen rifles felt trained on him from the darkness of the mine and the rocks above. The trap hadn't been sprung back in Bitterroot. It had been laid here all along, and he'd walked straight into its waiting jaws. The price of failure wasn't just his life. It was theirs. The rifle felt like lead in his hands. To drop was surrender. To keep it was death, Lily's death. The impossible choice closed around him, tighter than any rope, colder than the deepest mine shaft. The mocking silence from the dark mouth of the Serpent's Gulch shaft stretched, waiting for his answer. The cold voice from the mine's black mouth hung in the air, a noose tightening around Caleb Holt's throat. Lily's yellow ribbon fluttered like a captive butterfly high on the ridge, a cruel beacon confirming the threat wasn't empty. The unseen rifles felt like icy points pressed against the skin. Drop the rifle, or the little one loses more than her hair tie. The words echoed, twisting the knife of his helplessness. Ben's ghost whispered, too slow. Again, Marion's face, etched with terror but also that fierce, familiar defiance he loved, flashed before him. He couldn't fail them, not like Ben. But dropping his Winchester felt like severing his own limbs, leaving him naked before the wolves. Time stretched, thin and brittle as desert glass. Every ragged breath Caleb drew seemed amplified in the sudden silence. The wind hissed the pines above the mine entrance, carrying the damp mineral scent of deep earth and decay. Shadows pooled thickly around the attic, clinging like whispered sins. He could feel the weight of watching eyes from that darkness, from the rocks above the ribbon. His finger, slick with sweat, rested alongside the Winchester's trigger guard, a hair's breadth from committing to defiance or surrender. A memory surfaced, sharp and sudden, cutting through the panic. Not Ben this time, but Marion, years ago, during a brutal winter storm that had trapped him in the small sheriff's office for days. Snowdrifts climbed the windows. The wind screamed like a banshee. Lily, just a toddler then, had been feverish, crying inconsolably. Caleb, exhausted and feeling useless, had paced. Marion, her face pale but calm, had simply taken the child, wrapped her tighter in a quilt before the pot-bellied stove, and begun to sing. A soft, old lullaby Caleb's own mother had sung. Her voice, low and steady, had filled the small space, a counterpoint to the storm's fury. Slowly, Lily's cries had subsided, her eyelids drooping. Marion hadn't dropped her guard. She'd used the only weapon she had, her quiet strength, her unwavering presence. Presence, not surrender. Control. He couldn't drop the rifle. Not truly, but he could offer the illusion of surrender. It was a desperate gamble, thinner than hope. Slowly, telegraphing every move, he bent his knees, lowering the Winchester towards the rocky ground littered with pine needles and shale fragments. His gaze never left the dark maw of the mine, though he strained to catch any glimpse of movement near the yellow ribbon. He lowered the rifle until the stock touched the cold earth, his fingers still loosely curled around the receiver. Wise choice, Sheriff. The smooth, cold voice purred from the darkness. Real wise. Now kick it away. Nice and easy. Caleb nudged the Winchester with his boot toe, its swift foot scraping on the rock. It wasn't far. Not far enough to be useless if chaos erupted, but enough to satisfy the watcher. Hopefully. Further, the voice commanded, a harder edge creeping in. Caleb kicked it again. It slid another 2 feet, coming to rest against a gnarled root snaking from the cliff base. Still within lunging distance, he raised his hands slowly, palms out. I'm unarmed, he called, his voice rough but steady. Let me see them. My wife, my daughters. A low chuckle echoed from the mine, devoid of humor. All in good time. Holt, all in good time. Step forward, into the light. Let's get a proper look at the lawman who walks into the serpent's den. Caleb took a step, then another, moving into the patch of weak morning light, filtering down into the gulch before the mine entrance. He felt horribly exposed. The rock face towered above him. The mine yawned before him. The unseen marksmen held their positions. He kept his hands raised, his eyes scanning the shadows within the attic. He could make out shapes now, the rough-hewn timber supports, the glint of moisture on the walls. But no people, no Marion, no girls, just the oppressive darkness and the feeling of being dissected by hidden eyes. "Where are they?" Caleb demanded, the strain cracking his voice. "Safe," the voice replied, closer now. A figure detached itself from the deeper gloom near the mine entrance, stepping just into the edge of the light. He was tall, lean, dressed in a dark, expensive-looking duster over a gray shirt. His face was obscured by the shadow cast by his wide-brimmed hat, but Caleb could see the glint of eyes and the sharp line of a clean-shaven jaw. This wasn't some rough transporter. This was Vance, or someone higher. The air of controlled menace radiated from him. "For now, their safety depends entirely on your cooperation, Sheriff. You see, you owe a debt, a rather substantial one." Caleb's mind raced. "A debt? I owe you nothing." The man tilted his head slightly. "Don't you? Think back, Holt. Think back to a dusty trail south of here, near the Red Buttes. Think back to a stagecoach and a strong box that never reached its destination. Think back to a young, ambitious deputy named Caleb Holt, who looked the other way for a share of the silence." Ice flooded Caleb's veins. Red Buttes. 7 years ago, he'd been a green deputy in a lawless territory. A stage had been hit, guards killed. The territorial marshal strongbox, carrying payroll, vanished. Rumors had flown about a corrupt lawman tipping off the gang. Caleb had investigated, found nothing conclusive, but the suspicion had clung like burrs, eventually driving him further north to Bitterroot. He'd buried the shame, the whispers. He'd been clean, but the stain remained. "That's a lie," Caleb growled. "I found no proof. I arrested men for that job. Men who conveniently couldn't talk anymore," the figure said smoothly. "Men who took the fall while the real beneficiary. Well, let's just say he invested wisely in enterprises like this." He gestured vaguely toward the mine, towards the unseen network. "You took a cut of silence, Holt. Your inaction was your payment. Now the bill has come due. We need a man with your particular skills and your badge to smooth the way for certain shipments passing near Bitterroot." Caleb stared, disgust warring with a horrifying understanding. This wasn't just about his family as leverage. It was about him. His past, a shadow he thought he'd outrun, had coiled around his present and was strangling his future. They wanted to own him, to turn the lawman into a facilitator of their evil. The badge on his chest felt like a brand of betrayal. "Never," he rasped. The figure sighed, a sound like dry leaves skittering on stone. "Pity. I'd hoped you'd see reason, for their sakes." He raised a hand, a signal to unseen eyes above. Show him his incentive. A rough hand suddenly clamped over Caleb's mouth from behind, yanking his head back, while another pinned his arms. He hadn't heard the man approach. He must have crept from the rocks beside the entrance. Caleb struggled, but a third man materialized, slamming a fist into his gut. The air exploded from his lungs in a sickening gasp. He sagged, stars bursting behind his eyes, the taste of copper flooding his mouth. Through watering vision, he saw movement high on the ridge. A man stood near the pine with the yellow ribbon. He wasn't holding Lily, but he held a long knife. He raised it, sunlight glinting coldly on the blade, and slowly, deliberately, sliced through the yellow ribbon. It fluttered down, a tiny, broken promise, disappearing into the scrub below. Next time, Vance's voice cut through Caleb's haze of pain and fury. "It won't be the ribbon. Bring him inside. Let him see the merchandise. Maybe that will focus his mind." Half dragged, half carried, Caleb was hauled into the cold, damp embrace of the serpent's gulch shaft. The transition from weak morning light to near total darkness was disorienting. The air was thick with the smell of wet rock, stale earth, and something else. Fear, human fear. Lanterns hung from timber braces further in, casting long, dancing shadows that made the rough-hewn tunnel seem alive and malevolent. They passed a side chamber barred with heavy timbers. Inside, huddled shapes. Caleb's heart lurched. Marion. The name tore from him, raw and desperate, when the shapes moved, pressing against the bars. Marion's face, pale and streaked with dirt, appeared in the flickering light. Her eyes, wide with terror, found his, but there was no despair, only a fierce, burning anger. Lily clung to her skirt, her face buried. Little Rose stood slightly apart, her small frame trembling, but her chin was lifted defiantly. Seeing them, alive but imprisoned, the crude burlap sacks gone, but the memory of their shame a visible weight, ignited a furnace in Caleb's chest that burned away the pain and the fear. Alive. Caleb. Marion's voice was hoarse but clear. Don't listen to them. Don't. A guard by the bars slammed the butt of his rifle against the timber near her face. Quiet, woman. Caleb roared, lunging against the man holding him. He almost broke free, his shoulder slamming one captor into the tunnel wall, before a vicious blow to the back of his head sent him crashing to his knees, vision blurring. Vance stepped into his line of sight, blocking the view of the cell. Touching, Vance murmured, his voice devoid of warmth, but unwise. Secure him in the holding chamber across the way. Let him contemplate his choices. The buyer arrives at sundown. You have until then, Holt, to decide if your pride is worth more than your daughter's eyes or your wife's tongue. He turned and walked deeper into mine, disappearing into the shifting shadows. Caleb was dragged semi-conscious into another small, barred chamber opposite Marion and the girls. The heavy timber door slammed shut behind him, the iron lock clanging with finality. The guards retreated, leaving a single lantern flickering outside the bars, casting grotesque, leaping shadows on the damp rock walls. The silence, broken only by the frantic drumming of his own heart and the faint, muffled sound of Rose crying from across the tunnel, was suffocating. He pushed himself up, leaning against the cold stone, his head throbbing. Despair threatened to engulf him. Trapped, unarmed, his family imprisoned. Vance's revelation about Red Buttes was a poison, a lie twisted with just enough truth to sting. He had failed to find the real culprits. The guilt he carried for Ben now had a monstrous twin. Was this his reckoning? Was this why his family suffered? Because of a failure years old? He scanned his prison. It was little more than a hollowed-out niche, perhaps 8 feet square. Old mining debris littered the floor, broken timbers, chunks of worthless rock. And then, in the far corner, half buried under rubble, he saw it. Not a weapon, but something else. A small, rectangular object, bound in stiff, dark rawhide. A journal. His heart hammered against his ribs. He scrambled across the rough floor, ignoring the pain in his head and gut. He pulled the journal free, brushing off the dust and grit. It felt old, the rawhide stiff and cracked. It wasn't his. Whose was it? A miner's log? He fumbled with the crude leather tie and opened it. The pages were brittle, covered in faded, spidery handwriting. The dates were old, from a decade or more past. He scanned the entries, notes on rock strata, vein thickness, supplies, standard mining drudgery. He flipped further, his hands trembling. Then, near the middle, an entry stopped him cold. Met with a new investor today. Calls himself Smith, but I know that face. Saw him years back during the Pleasant Valley business. Name Silas Cobb. Got money now. Wants a quiet stake in the Serpent's Gulch. Says he's got connections for moving special goods. Discreet-like. Not sure I like it, but the silver's played out and the coin's good. Turn a blind eye before what's one more. Silas Cobb. Caleb stared at the name, the letters seeming to writhe on the page. His friend. the saloon keeper, the man who'd warned him about the stranger, about Rattlesnake Ridge. Silas, investing in the mine years ago. Silas, connected to moving special goods. Discreet like, the pieces slammed together with brutal force. Silas hadn't just heard whispers. He was part of the whisper. He'd known. He'd always known. His warning about the stranger, misdirection, sending Caleb toward the ridge, delivering him right into the trap. The betrayal was a physical blow, worse than any fist. Silas, his friend, his confidant, the man who poured him coffee while his family was being sold. A choked sob escaped him, a sound of pure anguish. He'd trusted Silas. He'd walked into this nightmare, guided by the hand of the man who helped orchestrate it. The journal slipped from his fingers. The depth of the deception was staggering. This wasn't just Vance's operation. It was rooted deeper, entwined with the very fabric of Bitterroot. And Silas Cobb was at its rotten heart. Across the tunnel, a soft scraping sound came from Marion's cell. Caleb looked up, blinking through the haze of betrayal and pain. Marion was pressed against the bars. She met his eyes, held his gaze with fierce intensity. Then, slowly, deliberately, she raised her hand. Clutched in her fingers was a small, sharp piece of shale. She began to scratch something onto the timber beam beside her. Letters, slowly, painstakingly. C-A-L-E-B. She was writing a message. Risking everything. Caleb held his breath, straining to see in the flickering lantern light. She finished the last letter. It wasn't his name. It was a word, a name. She pointed emphatically at the letters she carved. S-L-E-S. She knew. Somehow Marion knew. The confirmation was a second, deeper wound. She'd seen something, heard something, that implicated Silas. And she'd found a way to tell him, even here, in this pit of despair. Her eyes held his, a silent plea and a shared, terrible understanding. Before Caleb could react, before he could even form a thought beyond the crushing weight of Silas's betrayal, a thunderous roar erupted from deeper within the mine. It wasn't gunfire. It was the sound of the earth itself groaning in protest. The tunnel floor shuddered violently beneath Caleb. Rocks and dirt rained from the ceiling. The lantern outside his cell swung wildly, casting mad, leaping shadows. A thick plume of dust billowed down the tunnel, choking and blinding. The sound was followed by panicked shouts, the clatter of falling debris, and then, terrifyingly, a deep, grinding rumble that seemed to come from the very bones of the mountain. The initial tremor subsided, leaving an eerie silence broken only by coughing and the ominous trickle of dislodged pebbles. Then Vance's voice, stripped of its smooth control, rang out from the dust-choked darkness, sharp with genuine alarm. Cave in, the main shaft blocked. Check the air vents. Now! Chaos erupted. Guards scrambled past Caleb's cell, ignoring him in their panic, heading deeper into the mine where the dust was thickest. The lantern light flickered wildly. Caleb staggered to his feet, gripping the cold bars. Across the tunnel, through the swirling dust, he saw Marion pulling the girls tightly against the far wall of their cell, shielding them with her body, her eyes wide with new terror. The cave-in hadn't freed them. It had trapped them deeper. Caleb was still imprisoned, unarmed. His family was still captive. And now, the very mountain seemed intent on burying them all alive. The dust settled slightly, revealing Vance standing further down the tunnel, his face smudged, his expensive duster coated in gray powder. He turned, his eyes locking onto Caleb's through the bars. In them, Caleb saw not just menace, but a flicker of something else. Raw, primal fear. The control predator was cornered too. Vance drew his pistol, not pointing at Caleb, but his knuckles white on the grip. His gaze swept the unstable tunnel ceiling, then back to Caleb, a terrible calculation forming in his eyes. The collapse had changed everything. The rules had just crumbled with the rock. Caleb braced himself, the dust bitter on his tongue, the thunder of falling rocks still echoing in his bones. The mountain's fury had become the third player in their deadly game, and its next move was unknown. The dust hung thick as a shroud, tasting of shattered rock and ancient fear. Caleb Holt coughed, the grit scraping his throat raw, his eyes stinging as he clung to the cold iron bars of his cell. Across the tunnel, through the swirling gray haze, Marion's form was a blurred silhouette, still shielding Lily and Rose against the far wall of their prison. The thunderous roar of the cave echoed in his bones, replaced now by a sinister symphony. The frantic shouts of Vance's men deeper in the mine, the ominous groan of stressed timber, the relentless trickle of dislodged earth and pebbles raining down. The mountain had spoken, and its voice was chaos. Vance stood frozen for a heartbeat, his expensive duster powder gray, the polished veneer control utterly shattered. Raw fear flickered in his eyes as they darted from the choking dust cloud billowing from collapsed main shaft to the trembling ceiling overhead, then finally locking onto Caleb. The pistol in his hand trembled slightly, a stark contrast to its earlier menace. The collapse hadn't just blocked an exit. It had fractured a command, trapping predator and prey alike in a tomb of unstable rock. "You!" Vance's voice was a rasp, stripped of its smooth cruelty. He gestured wildly towards Caleb's cell with the gun. "Get him out. Now. We need every hand to clear that shaft." His fear wasn't for Caleb's family, nor for the trapped men deeper within. It was the terror of a cornered animal facing entombment, of a lucrative transaction, collapsing with the rock. The buyer arriving at sundown was now a specter of Vance's own doom. One of the guards, a burly man with a bloodied forehead, fumbled with a heavy iron key to Caleb's cell. The lock clanged open. Caleb didn't wait. He surged forward as the door swung, not towards freedom, but towards a guard. He drove his shoulder hard into the man's gut, sending him stumbling back into the tunnel wall with a grunt. The guard's rifle clattered to the rocky floor. Caleb snatched it up, the familiar weight of the Winchester a surge of desperate power in his hands. He swung the barrel towards Vance. Vance flinched, raising his own pistol, but his eyes betrayed his terror of the unstable mountain as much as the gun pointed at him. "Fool!" he spat, backing away slightly, his gaze flicking nervously upwards. "Shoot me and you bury us all. That timber won't hold." Caleb knew he was right. The rifle was leverage, not liberation. His eyes met Marion's across the dust-choked space. She gave an almost imperceptible nod, her gaze fierce, fixed on the fallen guard near Caleb's cell. The man groaned, clutching his stomach. Caleb saw it then, half hidden under the man's sprawled leg. The stiff, dark rawhide journal he dropped. Truth was still his only weapon against Silas's web of lies. Keeping the Winchester trained on Vance and the other guards who had emerged, wary and dust-covered, Caleb bent swiftly and grabbed the journal, stuffing it into the waistband of his trousers beneath his shirt. The rough rawhide scraped his skin, a constant reminder of betrayal. "You want hands to dig?" Caleb's voice was rough, cutting through the panicked murmurs of the guards. "Then you listen. My family stays unharmed. Right here, where I can see them. One scratch on them, and I put a bullet in the next timber brace I see. We all go down together." He gestured sharply with the rifle barrel towards Marion's cell. "Unlock it. Now!" Vance's jaw tightened. Fury war with a primal need to survive. The mountain groaned again, a deep, unsettling vibration that sent fresh showers of grit cascading down. Time was a luxury none of them had. "Do it." Vance hissed to the guard nearest Marion's cell. The man, pale-faced, hurried to comply. The heavy lock thudded open. Marion pushed the door wide, stepping out, pulling Lily and Rose close behind her. The girls clung to her, eyes wide with terror, faces pale beneath the grime. But they were out of the cage. Caleb's heart clenched. "Mama, the mountain's angry," Rose whispered, her voice trembling. "Hush, little dove," Marion murmured, smoothing Rose's hair, her own eyes never leaving Caleb, radiating a fierce, protective energy. "Papa's here." "You have your sight, Holt," Vance snapped, his fear sharpening his voice. "Now move. That shaft won't clear itself." He gestured frantically towards a swirling dust cloud marking the collapse. "You too." He pointed at guards. "With him. Watch him. The rest, start shifting rock. Move." Caleb kept Mary and the girls in his peripheral vision as he was prodded towards a collapse site by two nervous guards, their rifles held uncertainly. Vance stayed back near the junction, his pistol now pointed not directly at Caleb, but hovering, his attention divided between the rescue effort and the trembling ceiling. The air grew thicker, hotter, as they approached the cave-in. Dust clogged the lungs. The main tunnel was completely blocked by a massive pile of shattered rock, splintered timbers, and earth. Dim lantern light, placed precariously on stable rocks, illuminated the grim task. 3 other guards were already futilely pulling at smaller stones, coughing violently. Caleb surveyed the mess, the miner's journal a cold weight against the skin. Ben's ghost whispered, "Think, Caleb. Always think." He remembered Ben not dying, but living, scrambling over rock falls on hunting trips, assessing stability, with a keen eye his younger brother had admired. "Look for the key, Cal. The one stone holding the rest." He scanned the jumble. Near the top, a massive slab of granite leaned precariously against a fractured timber brace. Beneath it, the pile seemed denser, more packed. Removing that slab might trigger another collapse, or it might be the key to shifting the smaller debris behind it. It was a gamble with their lives. As he picked his way closer, a small, sharp stone skittered near his boot. He glanced back. Marion, holding the girls back near the safer junction, met his gaze. Her hand was subtly lowered near her skirt. Another small stone dropped from her fingers. Her eyes flicked meaningfully towards one of the guards near Caleb, a younger man, maybe 18, with a wispy attempt at a mustache. His hand shook as he tried to lift a rock, his face pale with terror that went beyond immediate danger. Jedediah Pike, Silas's loose-tongued informant from the saloon, caught up in something far bigger and darker than he bargained for. Caleb turned back to the rock pile, mind racing. Pike was vulnerable, fearful, maybe pliable. He hefted a smaller rock, feigning effort, moving closer to the young guard. "This ain't no stagecoach robbery, Jed," Caleb muttered, his voice low, barely audible over the clatter of shifting stone and the guards coughing. Pike flinched, startled. "This is burying folks alive. Silas send you up here for this? He tell you it'd be easy silver?" Caleb kept his gaze on the rock in his hands, not on Pike's terrified face. Pike's breath hitched. He mumbled something incoherent, his eyes darting towards Vance, then back to the unstable pile. "He's back in Bitterroot, safe behind his bar," Caleb pressed, his voice a gravelly whisper, "while you choke on dust, while Vance here gets jumpy." He nodded subtly towards Vance, who was pacing near the junction, his pistol hand twitching. Men like Vance, when the walls close and they get rid of loose ends. Witnesses. He let the implication hang in the dust-filled air. Pike swallowed hard, a bead of sweat tracing a clean line through the grime on his temple. He looked at Caleb, genuine fear warring with a dawning horror. I just drove a wagon," he stammered, so quiet Caleb barely heard. "Up from Cheyenne. Didn't know it was people till," he shuddered, glancing toward where Marion and the girl stood. Hope, thin but sharp, pierced Caleb's dread. Pike was scared and remorseful. A potential crack in Vance's crumbling edifice. "You help me get my family out of here," Caleb murmured, shifting another rock. "I'll make sure Vance knows you turn on him under duress. You might walk away from this. Stay here." He let the sentence hang, punctuated by another ominous groan from the stressed timbers overhead. Before Pike could respond, a harsh shout came from Vance. "Holt, stop jawing, move that rock, or I start making choices about who breathes easy and who doesn't." His pistol gestured threateningly towards Marion and the girls. Caleb turned, the Winchester held loosely but ready. "This top slab," he called out, pointing with his chin. "It's the key. Pry it loose, the rest might shift. But it's risky. Could bring the whole roof down." He needed Vance invested in the plan. Focus on the rock, not his prisoners. Vance stalked closer, his eyes narrowed, assessing the slab Caleb indicated. The fear of suffocation warred with his innate caution. "How?" he demanded. "Need a lever, a strong timber," and men braced to pull. Caleb kept his voice steady, authoritative. He needed Pike positioned right. He needed Vance distracted. "Do it." Vance barked at the guards. You. Find a beam. Holt, you direct. But remember," he raised the pistol again, this time pointed directly at Rose. The little girl whimpered, burying her face in Marion's skirt. Marion's arm tightened around her, her own face a mass of fury and terror. One wrong move. The guard scrambled. A heavy, splintered timber beam was dragged over. Caleb positioned 2 men to brace, its end against a solid rock outcrop near the base of the pile. He directed another man and Pike to grip the beam further up, ready to pull when he gave the word. He positioned himself near the slab, a heavy crowbar one of the guards had produced in his hand. His heart hammered. This was the moment. Distraction. Opportunity. "On my count," Caleb yelled, his voice echoing in confined space. He raised the crowbar, wedging its tip beneath the massive granite slab. Dust sifted down. Vance watched, rapt, his pistol still trained on Rose, his knuckles white. 1, 2. He never reached 3. As all eyes fixed on precarious slab, Caleb threw his weight onto the crowbar, not to pry, but to shove it sideways with a violent heave. It clattered loudly against the rocks. Simultaneously, he dropped low and spun, the Winchester coming up not towards Vance, but towards a timber brace supporting the section of ceiling directly above Vance. "Now, Pike!" Caleb roared. Pike, eyes wide with terror and desperate hope, reacted not on logic but sheer panic at the shout. He didn't pull the lever beam. He shoved the guard next to him hard, sending the man stumbling into the rock pile. Then he turned and bolted down the tunnel toward the entrance. Chaos erupted. Vance, startled by the clatter and Pike's flight, jerked his pistol away from Rose for a split second. Caleb squeezed the Winchester's trigger. The shot wasn't aimed at Vance. It slammed into the already fractured timber brace 6 feet above Vance's head. The sound was deafening in the tunnel. The timber splintered with a sickening crack. A section of the ceiling, destabilized by the earlier collapse and Caleb's targeted shot, gave way. Rocks and dirt crashed down in a roaring avalanche directly onto the spot where Vance had been standing. Vance screamed, a sound cut horrifically short as he vanished beneath a cascade of rubble. Dust billowed anew, thick and blinding. Guards shouted in panic, diving for cover, abandoning the lever beam. Rocks rained down around Caleb, forcing him back. He scrambled towards Marion and the girls, who were crouched low against the tunnel wall, shielded somewhat by an overhang. The dust slowly settled, revealing a fresh pile of debris where Vance had stood. Only a hand, fingers clawing feebly at the air from beneath a massive rock slab, was visible before it went still. A chilling silence descended, broken only by the frantic gasps of the surviving guards and a relentless trickle of loose earth. Vance was gone, buried by the mountain he'd sought to exploit. Caleb grabbed Marion's arm, pulling her and the girls up. Run. Toward the entrance. Now! They stumbled down the tunnel, past the stunned guards who were staring in horror at Vance's makeshift grave. Caleb covered their retreat, the Winchester tracking any movement. But the guards seemed paralyzed, leaderless, more concerned with the unstable mountain than pursuing them. They burst out of the mine at it into the shockingly clean air of the gulch. Weak afternoon sunlight felt like a benediction after the tomb-like darkness. Caleb gulped in deep breaths, scanning the rocks above for snipers. The yellow ribbon was gone, but so were the men who had been watching. The cave-in's roar must have spooked them, or they'd fled with Pike. "Papa," Lily sobbed, clinging to his leg. "We're out, sweetheart." Caleb gasped, pulling her close, his free arm around Marion, who held Rose tightly. "We're out." He scanned the gulch, the steep slopes. They weren't safe. Vance's men might regroup. The mysterious boss Silas served was still out there, and they were miles from Bitterroot, deep in outlaw country. He looked at Marion, her face etched with exhaustion and residual terror, but her eyes alight with fierce relief. She nodded toward the journal tucked into his waistband. "Silas," she breathed, the name a curse. Before Caleb could respond, a new sound froze his blood. Not the groan of rock, but the distinct, rhythmic beat of multiple horses approaching at speed, echoing up the gulch from the direction of Bitterroot. Hoofbeats, coming fast. Caleb pushed Marion and the girls behind a cluster of large boulders near the mine entrance, raising the Winchester, his body screaming with exhaustion and tension. Were these Vance's reinforcements? Buyers arriving early? Or something else? He peered cautiously around the boulder. 5 riders rounded the bend below, kicking up dust. They reined in sharply at the sight of the mine entrance and the figures taking cover. The lead rider, his face shaded by a wide hat, scanned the scene, the mine mouth, the armed sheriff, the terrified woman and children. He raised a hand, signaling the others to halt. Then, slowly, deliberately, he pushed his hat back on his head. Caleb's breath caught. Staring back at him, his expression unreadable, sat Silas Cobb. The saloon keeper's flinty eyes took in the scene. The absence of Vance's men guarding the entrance, Caleb's rifle pointed towards him, Marion's accusing glare. Silas showed no surprise, only a grim, weary calculation. He hadn't come to help. He'd come to assess the damage, to clean up the mess. And he'd found his sheriff very much alive and holding the rawhide journal that damned him. The betrayal wasn't just revealed. It was staring him in the face across 50 yards of dusty gulch. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken accusations and a promise of violence. Caleb tightened his grip on the Winchester. The mountain hadn't buried them. Now, the real reckoning began. The dust motes danced in the weak afternoon sun, caught in the sudden stillness like frozen accusations. 50 yards of stony gulch separated Caleb Holt from Silas Cobb, a chasm widened by betrayal into an abyss. Silas sat his horse, the picture of the solid saloon keeper, yet his flinty eyes held none of the familiar gruffness, only a cold, assessing calculation. Behind him, 4 riders shifted uneasily, hands near holsters, faces hard and unfamiliar. The air crackled with the unspoken. The rawhide journal pressed against Caleb's skin, Marion's fierce glare burning from behind the boulder where she shielded Lillian Rose, the echoing silence of the mine where Vance lay buried. Caleb kept the Winchester trained squarely on Silas's chest. 1 shot. That's all it would take. Justice, swift and brutal. Ben's ghost whispered approval. But the girls were here. Marion was here. A shootout in this confined space was a death sentence for them all. He needed time. He needed leverage beyond a rifle. "Silas," Caleb called, his voice rough but carrying clearly in the gulch's rocky throat. "You come to collect, or just admire your handiwork?" He subtly shifted his stance, positioning himself more squarely between Silas's riders and the boulders sheltering his family. Silas nudged his horse a step forward, his expression unreadable. "Caleb." He tipped his hat slightly, a grotesque parody of their old familiarity. "Looks like you've had a busy morning." "Vance." "The mountain claimed him," Caleb replied flatly, "along with your prophet." He patted the journal through his shirt. Found some interesting reading. Seems the Serpent's Gulch had more than silver veins. Had partners. Partners like Silas Cobb, investing in special goods. Discreet-like, he let the words hang, watching for a flicker. Silas's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. The riders behind him exchanged wary glances. "Old miners tell tales, Caleb," he said, his voice deceptively calm. "Scratchings in a book don't mean much." "They mean enough when they name you," Caleb countered. "Enough when they tie you to the men who put price tags on my wife, on my little girls. His voice cracked on the last words, the image of those burlap sacks, the numbers scrawled in greased pencil, searing his mind anew. Why, Silas? Money? Was a thirsty miner not enough? A muscle twitched near Silas's eye. The facade of the weary businessman cracked, revealing a core of something harder, colder, forged in resentments Caleb had never glimpsed. Money. Silas spat the word. Money's grease for the wheels, Caleb. Always has been. But this was about balance. About what's owed. Caleb frowned. Owed? What in God's name did I owe you? Silas's gaze shifted past Caleb, toward the mine entrance, then back, filled with a bitterness as deep as the mine shaft. Red Buttes, he said, the name dropping like a stone. You remember Red Buttes, Deputy Holt? The stage robbery? The missing strongbox? The whispers that followed you north like stink on a dog. Caleb's blood ran cold. Vance's accusation echoed. That was a lie. I investigated. You investigated the wrong men. Silas's voice rose, sharp with years of suppressed fury. Convenient scapegoats. While the real thief, the weak link, walk away clean. He leaned forward in the saddle, his eyes boring into Caleb's. My brother, Eli, he was driving guard that day. Young, stupid, got tangled with the wrong crowd. He wasn't supposed to die. He was just the inside man, scared out of his wits. He panicked when the shooting started, tried to run. Your investigation, your righteous pursuit, you chase him down like an animal. Cornered him in that box canyon south of Red Buttes. You shot him in the back, Caleb, left him to bleed out in the dust. Caleb stared, stunned. A memory surfaced, jagged and painful. A desperate young man, wild-eyed, turned to flee as Caleb rounded a boulder, the crack of the rifle, the slump. He'd thought it was one of the known robbers. The territorial marshal had confirmed the identities later, but had they? Had Eli Cobb been one of them? The guilt over Ben now had a terrifying twin. I didn't know, Caleb whispered, the Winchester feeling suddenly heavy. Didn't know? Silas scoffed, a harsh, humorless sound. Or didn't care. Justice was served, wasn't it? Case closed. You got your star polished. My brother got a pauper's grave. His voice lowered, thick with venom. I bided my time, built my stake. When I heard the whispers of Vance's operation, needing a man rooted in Bitterroot, needing a place to stage goods, I saw my chance to build an empire on the bones of the man who killed my brother. And when Vance learned about your past, your vulnerability, well, using you, breaking you, forcing you to serve the very evil you represent, that was the sweetest justice of all. Delivering your family to him, that was a final payment on Eli's debt. He gestured toward the boulder, seeing them tagged, displayed, knowing it was my hand guiding it. That was balance, Caleb. The monstrous truth unfolded, colder than the mountain shadows. It wasn't just greed. It was a vendetta, slow-cooked over years, using human misery as its currency. The journal's dry entries about Silas's investment now screamed with malice. Caleb felt sick. He'd failed Eli Cobb as surely as he'd failed Ben. Silas's revenge was a poison that had infected everything. You sold your soul, Silas, Caleb said, his voice thick with disgust. And you sold innocent lives. A soul? Silas shrugged, the gesture chillingly casual. A luxury I lost when Eli died. Now hand over that journal, Caleb, and the woman and girls come with me. Vance's buyer might still pay for damaged goods, a special with the sheriff's family as a demonstration piece. His hand drifted towards a pistol on his hip, his riders tensed, hands tightening on reins and weapons. Caleb saw it then, the flicker of movement high, on the eastern gulch rim. Jedediah Pike, the young guard, had scrambled up there during the chaos in the mine and hadn't fled. He was crouched behind rocks, Caleb's own discarded Winchester from the initial standoff now in his trembling hands. His face was pale, terrified, but his eyes were fixed on Silas with dawning horror. He'd heard everything. Silas followed Caleb's gaze. "Pike," he sneered, "you sniveling little." Pike didn't let him finish. Fueled by terror, remorse, and the sheer monstrousness of Silas's confession, he stood up, exposing himself. "No more, Mr. Cobb," he yelled, his voice cracking but loud in the gulch. "No more. You lied. You said it was just contraband." He leveled the Winchester shakily at Silas's riders. It was a spark. Silas snarled, drawing his pistol with viper speed, aiming not at Pike, but at Caleb. "Kill them. All of them." Chaos erupted. Gunfire shattered the stillness. Silas's riders went for their guns. Caleb dove sideways, shoving Marion and the girls deeper behind the boulder as bullets spanged off the rock, showering them with splinters. He returned fire, the Winchester bucking against his shoulder. One rider clutched his arm and tumbled from his horse. Another shot went wild as his horse reared. High above, Pike fired. His shot went wide, kicking up dust near Silas's horse. But it was enough. Silas, momentarily distracted, shifted his aim towards a ridge. It was the opening Caleb needed. He fired. The bullet caught Silas high in the shoulder, spinning him in the saddle. Silas cried out, his pistol flying from his grasp as he clutched the wound, his face contorted in pain and fury. "Get him!" Silas roared at his remaining riders, blood soaking his coat sleeve. But the riders hesitated. Pike, emboldened, fired again, forcing one to duck. The other looked from the wounded Silas to the determined sheriff, to the terrified young man on the ridge. The fight had gone out of them. This wasn't the easy payoff they'd expected. One spurred his horse, bolting back down the gulch. The other, after moments' indecision, followed, leaving Silas alone, swaying the saddle, clutching his bleeding shoulder. Pike scrambled down the steep slope, sliding the last few feet, the Winchester clattering beside him. He ran towards Caleb, hands raised. "Sheriff, I didn't know. I swear." Caleb kept his rifle trained on Silas, but nodded curtly at Pike. "Cover him." He gestured toward Silas. Pike snatched up the rifle, pointing it shakily at the wounded man. Caleb stepped out from behind the boulder. Marion emerged, holding Lily and Rose tightly, their faces buried against her. Caleb walked toward Silas, his boots crunching on the gravel. The saloon keeper looked diminished, his face gray with pain and shock, the vengeful fire in his eyes guttering out. "It's over, Silas," Caleb said, his voice low, weary. "The trade, the revenge, all of it." Silas stared at him, hatred warring with a dazed confusion. Eli mumbled, "He was just a boy." "And you made monsters of us both," Caleb replied. He reached up, his fingers closing not on his gun, but on the silver star pinned to his vest. He pulled it free, the metal warm from his skin. He looked at it, the symbol of the law, the duty he'd carried, the failures it now represented. Red buttes, Eli Cobb, Ben, almost failing Marion and the girls. He couldn't wear it anymore, not with this weight. He tossed the badge into the dust at Silas's horse's feet. It landed with a dull clink, the star upside down. "Jed," Caleb said, not taking his eyes off Silas. "Take his gun, bind his arm, then his hands. We're taking him back to Bitterroot." The journey back was long and silent, etched in twilight shadows. Caleb led Silas's horse, the former saloon keeper slumped in the saddle, hands bound, Pike walking beside him, rifle held with newfound resolve. Caleb rode Shadow, Marion perched behind him, her arms wrapped tightly around his waist, her face pressed against his back. Lily and Rose rode double on one of the riderless horses, small and exhausted, clinging to each other. The vast Wyoming plains stretched around them, indifferent to their pain, painted in the bruised purples and deep oranges of sunset. They camped by a dry creek bed as true darkness fell. Pike tended the horses, casting nervous glances at Silas, who sat slumped against a rock, his eyes closed, breathing shallowly. Caleb built a small fire, its flickering light a fragile shield against the immense, star-strewn sky. Marion sat close, Rose asleep in her lap. Lily curled against her side, eyes wide, watching the flames. Caleb handed Marion the rawhide journal. "Proof," he said simply, "against Silas, against whatever's left of his operation." Marion took it, her fingers tracing the stiff cover. "What will you do?" she asked softly, her voice hoarse. "Without the badge?" Caleb stared into the flames. He saw Ben's laughing face. He saw Eli Cobb's terrified eyes in that canyon. He saw Marion twirling in wildflowers. He saw the price tags. The journey had stripped him bare. The law, as he'd worn it, felt tainted. But protecting his family, that was a duty deeper than any star. "I don't know," he admitted, the honesty raw. "But I'm here, with you. That's the only duty that matters now." Rose stirred, blinking sleepily. "Papa," she murmured, "are the bad men gone?" Caleb reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. Her skin was soft, alive. "Mostly gone, little dove," he whispered. "We're safe now. Look, Papa." Lily pointed upwards, her voice filled with fragile wonder. "The stars are out, like Mama's diamonds." Caleb looked up. The stars were indeed out, countless pinpricks of cold, ancient light, burning with silent intensity in the velvet blackness. They offered no answers, no absolution, only distance and a terrible, beautiful indifference. Yet beneath them, huddled around the small, defiant fire, was warmth, was life, was family. Marion reached out, her hand finding Caleb's. Her fingers were cold, but her grip was strong. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The shared ordeal, the terror, the betrayal, the narrow escape, it hung heavy in the air between them, a burden they would carry together. But so did the simple fact of their presence. Alive, together, the fire crackled, sending sparks dancing upwards toward the indifferent stars. Silas groaned softly in his bindings. Pike stared into the flames, his young face etched with the horrors he'd witnessed and enabled. The wilderness stretched away in all directions, vast and untamed. Justice for Eli, for Ben, for the victims of the trade. It felt incomplete, messy, stained with the dust of the gulch and the darkness of mine. Caleb had traded his star for their lives, and the weight of that choice settled on him. A new kind of badge, invisible and heavy. But as Lily nestled closer to Marion and Rose sighed in her sleep, Caleb Holt knew one thing with absolute certainty. He would build his own justice now, brick by brick, moment by moment, right here in the circle of firelight, protecting the fragile, precious things a vast, uncaring sky could never touch. The stars burned on, silent witnesses to a hard-won peace, fragile as a flame, yet fiercely guarded. Dawn would come, bringing Bitterroot, bringing reckoning for Silas, bringing an uncertain future. But for this one quiet night, under the endless Wyoming sky, they were safe. They were together. And for now, battered and scarred, it was enough. The wind sighed through the sagebrush, carrying away the echoes of gunfire and screams, leaving only the soft crackle of fire and the steady, living breath of his family. It was a sound sweeter than any promise, more solid than any vow. It was home.